and then there's Don, and there's Jim and Barbara Gaines, so I'll check in with them. Alex, you're welcome to sit down if you want, but you don't have to.
We'll make space.
Hey, Alex.
We'll make space.
There's always room at the table.
There's
We'll
always-
make sure. Yeah. Okay, so this is our last session on confirmation, which means, whoo, you're done after this one. And the topic allotted for the day is world religions, but I want to start not with world religions, but with like questions or ponderings or like, hey, can you say that thing again? Or I never got a chance to comment or question. So I want to open the floor for that because this really is our last meeting together for this reason before the bishop comes. When he comes, he'll probably ask to meet with you December 4th at this time ahead of the 10:30. So the confirmation, reaffirmation, reception happens at 10:30. He's only coming for the one service. And so it's going to go like that. And remember, heads up, I won't be here. So Alex and I are sharing this. Alex will be your presenter. I'm doing climbing training at Enchanted Rock. It sounds fun. I'd rather be with you. I would, but I think this is a valuable skill that will like help the parish down the road. So we're making that shift. So questions, comments, concerns?
What event started the Anglican Church?
Great question. So it really started with the series of reformations, and I think it's best if we put an S on that. Really started with Martin Luther, and reminder when we did history, the history lesson, Henry VIII was darned opposed to the Protestant reformations, really opposed. Probably the piety moment for him was when Catherine of Aragon had, that was his brother's wife. He got papal dispensation. He thought that was right. I mean, I think we should give him a little bit of like affirmation. He thought he was doing his biblical duty, marrying his brother's wife, Arthur, who never consummated the marriage, so that he could have children for his brother. That's in Leviticus, right? And then she had a bunch of stillborn, malformed children. And I mean, like, they looked like dragons by commentary of the day. And I think it's fair to say Henry really thought he got it wrong. He thought God was punishing this union. And keep in mind, they just fought the War of the Roses for like 50 years between the Lancasters and the Yorks, neither of whom won. The Tudors showed up in the middle, right? Like they kind of picked up the pieces, and Henry VII was the one who established the Tudor dynasty. So I think it really started here was Henry locked into a marriage that wasn't life-giving, that was going to plunge his country back into a civil war, and he was desperate. And he was so desperate, he reached out to the Pope, who literally could not give him an annulment, could not, because the Pope was surrounded by Catherine's uncle's army, Philip of Spain. I would tell you that's the real catalyst. I think Henry wanted to be a good Roman Catholic, and in his moment of need, personal and national, the church could not show up for him.
So is there a day that says we've got X decades, whatever? Is there a day, and from that we celebrate so many years?
We don't. I mean, I would tell you like what we tend to celebrate. A lot of us forget that Halloween, All Hallows Eve, is also Reformation Day. So that's the day that Martin Luther postulated his theses, right? Which mostly had to do with indulgences, right? Most people don't realize, and yeah, most people don't realize that's what we're doing on Hallows Eve. It's Reformation Day. So that tends to be what we do. We don't celebrate the act of supremacy. Like we don't say like, oh, here we are, 490 years into the act of supremacy. This year will be the 490th anniversary of the 1532 act of supremacy. That's where, right, Henry VIII declared himself supreme over the church in England. By the way, I hope that makes sense to us as good federalists, right? There are such things as states' rights. Those are cooked into our conscience. That's really what Henry wanted. He wanted states' rights. Never mind that he also blended that with the divine right of kings, which we don't love. We don't love that idea. Although keep in mind, we've had dynastic presidencies in this country. And that can start to blend, right? Like, I don't even just mean the Bushes. There's the Roosevelts, there's the Clinton run to be like a dynastic thing, right? And that starts to turn into like it can start to get close to the thing we didn't want.
Okay.
If we wanted to celebrate, Joe, we could celebrate the introduction of the prayer book. 1789, Samuel C. Berry finished the first book of common prayer for the states. We could celebrate his consecration as bishop. Right? Remember, he went to England and they said no. He went to Scotland and they said yes, if you'll do it the Scottish rite.
Oh, I would assume if Henry VIII said he was then Pope of Britain, that any growth outside of Britain would be the growth of the British Empire, which is why it wound up in the Americas, probably more or less followed the empires.
That could be. And if you think about what Henry VIII did, right, he said there should be autonomy of the church according to, like, the region. Well, the American Revolution was just doing what he did. Right? They took him real seriously and said, we want to do that too. Yeah, that's interesting.
I'm sorry, I'll finish my questions. When was the Anglican Episcopal minor schism in America?
Well, it happened at the Revolution. I mean, it happened July 4, 1776. It took a little bit longer than that, right? Because several clergy, Samuel C. Berry, if you've seen Hamilton, he's the one who opposes Hamilton. He says, don't fight this war, it's wrong. So he started out anti-revolution, and then he sort of converted during the revolution to like the need. So I don't know when you say, I think we were estranged from the Anglican Church. Hence, they would not consecrate Seabury. Obviously, we fought another war in 1812. So there was some estrangement. And then I think the Anglican Communion started being a big deal when people like us and later India broke away from Mother Church, but still had a church presence. And how do we make that work? And that's where communion, instead of Archbishop of Canterbury, that developed, I'd say, over decades.
Okay. That's it.
Thanks, Bill.
Last week, we talked about having another session on the 6th of November. Is that still planned, or?
No, but we can do it on the 13th if we'd like. I'm happy to do another one with you. The reason I can't do it next week is I'm talking about family camping in Palo Duro. But if we would like to have another session, again, with just more open Q&A or whatever is serving to you, I'd be grateful to do it.
Okay.
So maybe we can decide at the end of today. And really the way we decide is, hey, I'd like another session, then we'll have one.
Right,
And
thanks.
part of the reason we had that conversation was I wasn't able to get all the materials for our service project.
Mhm.
So we would have the opportunity to do that because
To do a
I
service.
found the materials this past week at a different Costco that I went to. So,
What's the project for? Man?
it would be our service project. It would be we would be making homeless bags for to give out to homeless in our cars, water bottles, stuff, and putting stuff in that.
And I've got a second one we can add to it.
Oh, cool. Perfect. Yeah, then we could do that. So if you guys, we could talk about that at the end. If y'all are open to that, we could do that.
Yes.
Well, and maybe if you wanted to do a service project, so is anybody here interested in going camping in Palo Duro during spring break? So you could come to that session and we could run them jointly if you want, because the other thing I like us to do is paint votive candles
Okay.
for the Thanksgiving baskets so that families get a little
Yeah, I like it.
candle. It's
Cool.
You're
I like
gonna,
it.
it's gonna sound funny, right? I've got these stained glass paints. You paint glass with them. It looks like stained glass. You drop a tea light in there, and it's just a sweet addition to the bag,
Love it.
right?
Yeah, that's
It's
cool.
one little
Love it.
candle, but we'll give them a couple tea lights to drop in there, and we can. And I've got all those paints,
Right.
And so that's a nice thing
Yeah.
to add quality to the Thanksgiving bags if you want.
Yeah, that's great.
So you'll have to get them this week, but I have the
Yeah.
paints, and I'll get them
Let's do
to
it.
you. Yeah.
We had the misfortune of going to Palo Duro on a Saturday after almost a week of rain.
Oh.
Yeah.
So be careful about Palo Duro because it is all clay.
Roger.
It's normally a
And
desert though, yeah.
If it's rained a lot or is raining a lot, hip-high boots are required.
Hey, I want you to know, I am going to Utah today,
Oh,
and I will be wearing a wetsuit for 2 days of hiking. Because I'll be swimming. I've never done this. I don't know why. But I'm going today. So roger that. Any other questions? And they can be even small things. They can be logistics. Yeah.
The red candle in the side of the church and then the
Yeah.
one to the right of the altar.
Yeah.
Do those always burn?
They do. They're
They do.
nonstop burning. And what they recognize is like the idea that there is this sacramental presence. And we're a little disingenuous because we have two of them.
Mhm.
It's a typical thing that you keep it lit next to the tabernacle. That's the mini fridge where you store the communion. It's not called an ombre. People use that word. It's a tabernacle. Some traditions call it the ark. And we call it the tabernacle. And it just shows there's something in there. On Good Friday or Black Friday, whichever you call it, we empty that. And the candle comes out and moves with the reserved sacrament. So it goes together. There's one in the chapel, even though we don't store reserved bread and wine there, because it's a place of memorial for the dead. So I've insisted we have both.
So who makes sure that stays
The
burning?
altar
Just
guild, they
curious.
change
Okay.
it every week with a 90% wax, 10% beeswax candle that just burns all week.
Interesting. Okay.
Thanks for asking. Like, people don't ask that.
Yeah, I was wondering. And then I had another question
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
The incense that you use, what is that? It's frankincense?
So it's not consistent.
Oh, it's
There are
not.
many blends. Now, if you read the book of Exodus, there's a kind of incense that you can only use in worship of God. And if you use it at home, you get killed. And there's a blend in there. I don't use that blend. We actually got a sample pack that's got many different flavors in it. Sometimes I pick stuff up, like when I went to Jordan and when I went to Israel, I bought frankincense and myrrh or whatever. Sometimes I use, I've used nard. I had nard before. That's what Mary pours on Jesus in Holy Week. So there's no like limit. We can kind of choose our own adventure. I don't think you can put cannabis in there, even in Colorado. I mean, I've wondered about this. Like, can you like walk some smells that give people peace in Colorado? I think that's against the bishops. It's not against the law, curiously, but I don't think we do that. So there's a lot of room, right? And with the oil too, like if I anoint you with oil, I'm about out of this. It was rosemary infused oil. My last diocese used to make oil and you could have it. In this diocese, we get chrism. That's the thing a bishop consecrates. I only use that at baptism. I use the other oil at all times, and I made that myself. It's not as rosemary as they got in San Diego, and I got lots of it. So I may put some more in there and see if I can't get, because I love the smell of the oil. It's just like this reminder all day long, there's this stuff on there. Yeah, but I can bless the oil. The bishops aren't required to do that, if that makes sense. Okay.
I was baptized in the, whatever you want to call it, at a Joan Jett concert.
Oh.
I didn't.
Oh, you're talking about the
I didn't smoke
marijuana.
it.
You're talking about the
Oh,
marijuana.
okay.
Okay.
I'm talking about marijuana.
Baptized with a spirit. I'm not gonna
No,
call it
no.
a holy one, but
I
with a
did.
spirit.
I didn't tap into
Yeah.
That's fine.
Joan Jett's spirit. It was the smell of the
Hey,
participants.
Jack Johnson knows that blend too, and so does Ben Harper. So if you go to one of those concerts, whether you brought your own or not, it is there. So, yeah. I've heard. Yeah. Anyway.
Sorry, I kind of.
No, it's fine. It's supposed to be fun.
That's
It's
good.
nice.
I have another question.
Please.
Like if you go to Schulenburg and the painted churches,
Mhm.
all the saints that are in like the Episcopal Church doesn't focus as much on the saints, right? I mean,
So the tradition is wide, which means some people are real big on saints' days. And I will tell you, I used to have a Eucharist on Tuesdays
Mhm.
that had an anointing with oil Eucharist, but the sermon was always the saint I'd chosen for the week there's a calendar. Right?
Okay.
So the way we celebrate saints who have departed, we celebrate them on the day in which they entered larger life. That's their death day. So Martin Luther King, his day is not January 21st, it's April 4th.
Mhm.
That's the day he was assassinated and died. So that's his saint's day, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And it's kind of up to us. Some people say like, hey, if you want to do a saint's day, you have to have the bishop's permission because it's not an electionary. And sometimes we ask, I'll be honest, I don't always ask because, hey, like Francis Day, I think it's like really worth hearing the guy's story. You know, a lot of people don't realize that he did this and this and this and this. And this story really brings, I think, like the gospel to light. So sometimes we'll make that transfer. I can tell you that our Saint's Day, that St. Thomas, is December 21st. Well, that's tough to celebrate. It's always Advent 4 or it's Christmas Eve, but we're doing it this year anyway. So because St. Thomas was a missionary to India, we'll have a sitar player that day. So this is the stuff we get to kind of choose a little bit. There's conversation, but if I don't start the conversation, then we don't do that. Now, some churches will have, they'll say, hey, it's the Feast of St. Mark Friday, so come do a Eucharist for St. Mark. And some people do that. And the book we have, it's called Holy Women, Holy Men, gives you a calendar, and some of the people like are in there, like John Muir. He wasn't an Episcopalian that I know of. And he wrote like, hey, the mountains are calling and I'm going to answer God in the mountains instead of going to a church. And he has a saint's day, right? Martin Luther King's in there, right? And he wasn't an Episcopalian, right? So we're not like limited. We actually recognize these are holy people that we kind of know about or they're worth knowing about. And of course, like, I think what we really get to do next week is realize like, hey, saints are not just dead folk. Like my mother is a saint in my life and there's really nothing she can do to undo that. Like if she recanted and became wicked and whatever, it wouldn't negate all the faithfulness she's had. So sometimes we're afraid, like, what if they get it wrong? And then we've like sanctified them. We shouldn't have done that. And I just think that's like maybe not a healthy perspective. The truth is like we've all got our own stuff and faith, hope, and love, like that's what we're celebrating.
Well, related to this, so in the Roman Church, there's a very long process of canonization.
Absolutely.
So what is it
We
involved in
don't,
the
okay,
Episcopal
and
Church?
this is really good because, you know, in the Roman Church, there's essentially two kinds of saints, right? The canonized ones and then the other ones, right? And in some ways, the other ones are more like personal to you. And the canonized ones, the way it goes in like the Roman mindset, right, is like these people have entered into larger life and like by addressing them, and you're praying to God through them, right? It's kind of like a satellite because you know them and you know of their works that are emulable and lofty and lovely, right? That they sort of show you they've made it into God's good graces because a miracle works like in their name or in a thing they touched or like in their tooth. I'm not making fun of this. I'm saying like it's embodied and there's like a miracle, like somebody was sick and they're not sick, right? So look, that person is interceding with God. They're in heaven, we're on earth. So they're using like their position to say, God, look at this person, right? So that's how they get canonized. They've got to have 3 miracles that get like verified, like, hey, they weren't faking. Like somebody had appendicitis and then they just didn't. It's pretty miraculous, right? And they did it because they had like a Mother Teresa medallion, or they prayed this prayer and that got associated, or they touched this thing, right? So sometimes we think, oh, that's the only kind. But you know, the Roman Church, there's everyday saints too. So there's canonized and there's everyday. You know, in the Episcopal Church, we're not looking for like physical miracles. What we're looking for is people who have pointed us to a larger life, living or dead. So you can decide. Gandhi was a Hindu till he died. He pointed folk to God. Is he a saint? I say yes. You make your own decision. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Like I'm not afraid to celebrate Gandhi at all, right? Because his embrace of nonviolent protest, I think, is godly.
And it's influenced many other people following
It
that
influenced
path.
Martin Luther King Jr.
Didn't he die before the 50s, like in 49?
I thought he died in the 50s, actually.
Well, he
Gandhi.
definitely, with Martin Luther King, had direct one-on-one discussions.
They exchanged letters. Yeah, and Martin Luther King did go to India and meet Gandhi. Yeah.
And then he came back.
And he came
And
back
then the
committed to
Civil-
nonviolent protest, which he
Civil
learned
War.
from Gandhi and from the gospel.
And I forget, but this is a homework question, or should I say a Google entry?
Yeah.
what did Martin Luther King do before he saw Gandhi? There's something significant in that.
That's a great question. I think Martin Luther King Jr. had this idea of a beloved community that included oppressed and oppressors. I think he had that his whole life. And I think what Gandhi revealed is like, how do you get there? Not how do you change the laws, how do you change hearts? And that's what King said, right? That we can change the law and people will still treat us poorly. So it's not an either or, it has to be a both and. We need legal protection, but we also need hearts changed. And the way he did that, and I shared this story in church 2 weeks ago, right? He learned from Gandhi, who was burning those identification cards, who kept getting up after he was beaten. And the policeman couldn't hit him anymore because he wasn't fighting back. Who doesn't fight back? Like, we all understand some code of honor. Like when you just beat somebody up and they don't fight back, like there's just something like not human about that. When they fight back, it's like now it's on, right? But when they don't fight back, it's like, what's wrong with you? Fight, you know? And like this is essentially Gandhi's story. This is actually a great segue to world religions if you want me to make it. But if you've got other questions,
I do have one.
Please, please.
Go ahead. Please,
Mine's really simple. Why is it called an narthex?
I don't know. It's a Roman word. I mean, it's like a Latin term, right? And so it probably has to do with that. It's like an antechamber. I'm afraid I don't know that word. I know why it's called sanctuary, right? Because of like sanctus, holy place, refuge, that sort of business. But narthex is beyond.
This is kind of a random question, but when you anoint the sick, are you praying, when you pray over them, are you praying for healing specifically?
Are you asking me personally, or are you asking what other clergy do? Or both?
Can we do both?
Yeah. So I think it has to do with like what your disposition about prayer is and how God works. And look, I'm going to say miracles happen to me unpredictably. And I don't think miracles are doled out because you deserve them or because you believe enough. I just don't think that. It's not been my experience. That's like blaming and punishing the victim if it doesn't work. And I can't go there. So what do I think? I think that physicality is part of our being, and our soul includes our body, but it also includes those invisible parts of ourselves, like our emotions and our thoughts and our spiritual journey and the way we look at the world, right? And so, yes, if somebody is dying of cancer, I can ask for them to have healing. And I don't know what that means. Maybe it means acceptance or peace that they're dying. Maybe it means that. Maybe it means like that they stop dying of that cancer. So I kind of approach with ambiguity, and like I'll tell you what the way, and I've made my own prayer. When I anoint people who are sick for any reason, even if their body's fine, maybe they have remorse or they've got regret or they've just got anxiety, right? I say, I anoint you with oil in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I do that. And I lay hands on you, beseeching God to nourish you with grace and peace, especially in moments of pain, doubt, anxiety, worry, grief, waiting for medical testing, fear, doubt. To drive away from you all sickness of mind, body, and spirit, so that you might know the healing power of God's love more and more each day. I mean, the truth is we're all going to die. We're all dying. We don't know when. So dying is going to come. You're not going to get away from it. A lot of us would like to die in our sleep or later in life, but it's not the world God created. It's not how it goes, right? So usually when people are encountering death, whether it's physical or spiritual, like I just feel dead inside. I'm depressed. I'm anxiety ridden. Like that's a real kind of death. We like deliverance from death with a capital D. That's what I pray for.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. I have one
And
question.
sometimes God shows up and people's cancer just isn't there. And I don't know how God decides. I don't know how any of that works. And I don't say, oh God, you've got to save Bessie Sue from her cancer. I don't do that because I don't think it works like that. I just don't. And maybe that's because I've got a weak faith, but I refuse to blame the victim. And that's why I can't pray that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just had a question that's kind of off the wall too, but I just got back from a women's retreat in North Georgia. And this woman told me about green burials or green funerals. Do you know about that?
Is that where you like compost a body?
Yeah.
It's illegal in Texas.
Is that what it is? It's just state by state and
state by state.
Episcopal Church.
And there's lots of rules in the state. I mean, just if you, I don't want to like, just to tell you a quick rule.
I never
there's-
heard of such a thing.
There's a thing called a funeral lobby, and it exists in every state where funeral parlors have a lobby
It's a
with the state
business.
legislature.
It's an industry.
It's a business, and I'll tell you, for example, it's illegal in the state of Texas to take somebody's cremains and dig a hole and pour them in. That's against the law, unless it's a cemetery. Now, this makes no sense because that's organic material. It doesn't corrupt the water table at all. It's instantly absorbed. As soon as you pour it in the hole, you're not getting it out. Like it's gone. I'm allowed to sprinkle it on top of the grass.
Mm.
But I'm not allowed to bury it unless it's a cemetery. Now, that is not logically sensible. What's the difference?
Yeah, right.
What's interesting about that law is there's no enforcement. Most laws say you can't do this, and if you do, there's a fine. There's a, you can be arrested. This law says you can't do it. Used to be you couldn't have a columbarium outside a cemetery. St. Martin's lobbied and got a columbarium.
And what is
and-
that again?
A columbarium is a repository for ashes in a church.
Okay.
So without a cemetery designation. And the way the law changed was you could have one as long as you weren't within 50 miles of a waterway. That was the first iteration. St. Martin's wasn't. But then it opened up and now you can have them. And I think it's a matter of time before there's enough pressure to overcome the lobby where you can sprinkle stuff or you can dig a hole. If there happens to be a hole in the grass and I go to sprinkle the ashes, did I break the law? What if I dug the hole the day before? I thought it would just fill in. I don't know the answer to that,
Mhm.
and there's no enforcement. And to be honest, like a lot of this is changing. My parents don't believe in cremation because they believe you get your body back at the resurrection. And that's lovely, except like if you've been buried long enough, like you turn into dust anyway, right? And if God can work a miracle, like is it harder to work one kind of miracle over another? So this is where we come at peace. I don't push this on people.
Yeah.
It's happening organically because there's not enough space, because it's like 1/10 of the cost to be cremated.
Yeah.
And because most people, push comes to shove, they don't want the body they have now. They want like Brad Pitt's body, or they want like, Jim Thorpe's body. They want to be fit and trim and successful, and they never were. So,
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Bury this, what's it called? A anvil?
an urn.
Urn with a life-size picture of Brad Pitt lying on top of it in the ground.
Oh, sorry.
Alicia, why don't we go Alicia and then Bill and then,
Yeah.
and then Elizabeth, that's good.
You had talked about a garden for holding ashes.
Yes,
Is that still in works?
I'm working on it. It's funny that it's taken 7 years and we still don't have it. But part of it is like, we have to build it.
Mhm.
And I would tell you increasingly, I want a pet garden as well, because we can pretend like pets don't have souls, and those are people who've never had one. And like, I have my dog in a box, and I'd like to put her in a place. I didn't want her in a box, right? Like, that wasn't like
Mhm.
the way we lived together. So I'd like to have one side, and I'd like to have the other side. And I'd like to have a place you can come any time of day, night or day, outside, where you can be with that person, because we are embodied people. I meet all kinds of folk and they're like, well, Dad's wishes were to be scattered in Galveston Bay. That's cool, but I tell them, you might want to save some, because you can't go there. Save some and have a place you can go where you've designated, this is my place of remembrance. And I did the other part. Well, then you really made a challenge for God. You're in 2 different places. I think God's up to the challenge. Right? And look, Louis, I think is okay with being divided, because Louis's not here. Right? I mean, the question is like, what brings comfort and remembrance? So yeah, I hope so. Now, I would tell you, I can scatter ashes on this property anytime, but I do want to have plaque that says so-and-so is in this area, not right here, but in this area. And I want to have a place where you can sit and come. Okay, Bill,
Is it a columbarium we have here?
it is. That's
Okay.
what's in the chapel. We built the chapel for it.
That's what I thought. Thanks.
Real quick, last night I was reading about cremation, right? So is the Episcopal Church against having a member's ashes in your house? I know that Catholic
I don't think the
is.
Episcopal Church is against much. And when people tell you that it is, I just wonder if they really know the Episcopal Church. I mean, what we decided really early on is that we're unified in worship, not in doctrine. And you know, the truth is, it's only heresy if you teach it. So you believe whatever you want, say it. It's only heresy if you teach it. The odds of you being heretics are real low. I'm probably the one that can get in trouble for heresy, but not y'all. I mean, we're open to doubt. Air them out. Why not?
Exactly.
God's big enough to handle your doubt, even if we're not.
I'm say an expert in 10 fields, but it's not early Alzheimer's. It's something else. There you go. Get it? I can't remember what it is. And I can't remember what I was going to say.
If it comes back, just hop right in. It's fine. Do you want to hear about world religions?
I do.
Yes.
I'm not going to
There's
teach
time,
you all of
yeah.
them. I think I'm going to offer a series on that in January or February. But I do want to talk a little bit about our relationship to world religions, because I think that's really helpful. And look, I didn't know that any Episcopalian believes exactly what I'm getting ready to say, and that's the good news. You don't have to. Like, this is my perspective. But I do think that what we do as an Episcopal church is when we live into the gifts of the Episcopal church, we're curious and affirmative instead of suspicious and critical. And so, like, I would tell you, part of why I try to lift up to you elements of Judaism is because I find them life-giving. I sometimes have Jewish envy. Really, because some of the practices are amazing. And then we have to walk a line, I think, as all individuals do, but also in the church, the difference between celebration and appropriation, right? And so actually, I was at clergy conference this week, and the bishop has this list of things he puts up every year. Things I never thought I'd have to say out loud. Wash your alb, clean your teeth. No tarot cards for clergy. No Christian seders. Do not have a Seder meal, a Christian Seder meal. It's appropriation. Our Jewish brothers and sisters, don't do that. Now, he didn't say this, but I'll tell you, I've had Seder meals here before, but they came right out of the carb bin Jewish publication. I didn't talk about Jesus at all. I don't believe that's appropriation. And I think the bishop is saying, I mean, he didn't address this, and I didn't ask, because I'd rather not have his answer, to be honest. Because then it's definitive. I don't think it's appropriation to do what our Jewish brothers and sisters do and say, here's the life in this. And now we're going to go home. And tomorrow we're going to talk about the Last Supper, and it's totally different. I don't think that's appropriate. But everybody makes that decision. I was on a Knowles course this summer, and there was somebody who came in to do a sweat lodge. And we had an option to do it or not, although some of the leaders pushed it really hard. And some of our people said, this is appropriation. We're not Native Americans. We shouldn't be doing a sweat lodge. I think that's one approach. My approach was, I would love to see if there's life in this.
There is. I did
And
one.
I think that's respectful. I'm not trying to wrap it in and say like, oh, this is really all about Jesus. It's not. It is about getting like toxins out of your body. And I think the Native Americans realize physicality is a way to represent spirituality. And I've got crap I can't get rid of, and I'd love to sweat it out. I think that's respectful. Some of my colleagues disagree. Now, this is kind of the conversation we have with world religions, right? So you have different people. And I've had people in the church say, Mike, you know, you keep talking about how we should respect our Jewish brothers and sisters. But at the end of the day, I think we're right about Jesus, and I think they're wrong about Jesus. And I get that there's tough space for that. But I would tell you the reason I'm Christian is because my parents were. If my parents had been Muslim, I guarantee you I'd be an imam. I guarantee you that. I'm not, and I've already given up a lot of my family by being Episcopal. It's too liberal, it's too progressive, it's too this or that. But would I have given up my Islamic family to do something else, knowing that would mean my death? And possibly the death of my mother because her child did this thing? I don't think so. I hope not. I mean, that's a big gamble you're asking people to make for a story that wasn't in their core being. So I'll just tell you, for me, this is language that resonates for me, and I don't know if it resonates for your average person who lives in Saudi Arabia. I don't. So I don't feel like I need to go to Saudi Arabia and convert people to both my worldview and language and religious practices when I can see God in theirs. Now, I don't see God in flying a plane into a building. And I don't see God going into church on Sunday morning and shooting a doctor in the back of the head because he's performed an abortion. I don't see God in either of those practices. And Christians have done both of them. So it's not like Christians are peaceful, loving people. People are people. You've heard of the Inquisition, you've heard of the Crusades. We did this stuff in God's name, and it was wrong. And Muslim people do stuff in God's name that's wrong. And I think the more we study world religions so thoughtfully, we realize if God really is omnipresent everywhere at the same time, and I look at somebody else and I can't see God, that's my fault, not God's. Either God is everywhere or God isn't, which means you may hate rap music. But if you don't think God is in rap music, you're not hearing it. Now, it might be a cry of protest that you hear, right? It might be that. But I think we had to take our stuff serious, right? I really think we had to take ourselves serious about this. God is everywhere. In Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Judaism, in the Episcopal Church, somewhere in the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church. You got to look a little harder there. But like, that was a joke, right? But like, but like that's real, you know? And so like, I think I'm at the point in my life, and when I was in my young 30s, when I was in my 20s, I couldn't do this because my brain wasn't fully developed. I just honestly, like I'm a late bloomer. I can do what's right for me, and it may not be right for you. And that's all right. And I think the criterion is not just, hey, I'm not hurting anybody. It's what I'm doing is life-giving for people other than myself. And it doesn't cost you. People going to a synagogue costs me nothing. Costs me nothing. And when I hear what happens in synagogues, I want to lift that up to you so you understand God is fully present in Judaism. We do ourselves a disservice when we talk people out of God's presence in other places.
Amen.
That's this priest. If you ask another priest, they'll tell you something totally different. Sandra, you had your hand up.
I would like to go into the study of the different religions because I'm still struggling with something that a rabbi said because I'm a social worker, I got involved in the food packets for elderly Jews. And, so I wonder what's going on, you know, in people's minds with what they're struggling with now. And so, but somebody asked a rabbi what could be done. And he said, oh, what would happen if they accepted, or would they ever accept Christ? And he said, the Jews would be forgiven and the world would be saved. And I don't know, yeah, I still would like to hear more of that.
You know, I think I would tell you this, and I grew up hearing these three terms that we don't use in the Episcopal world very much. You usually hear these words in fundamentalist circles, honestly. Exclusivism, inclusivism, universalism. Exclusivism says, if you don't know Jesus Christ by name as your personal savior, you're going to hell when you die. You're excluded unless you have, that's spellcraft and witchcraft. If you don't know the right spell, Jesus, Abracadabra, you're going to hell when you die. There's a position called inclusivism, and you can read this in The Last Battle. That's in the Chronicles of Narnia. This is where two people show up in front of Aslan, who's like Jesus, and one's worshipped Aslan his whole life. And it's like, he says, come into my country. The other one was like the high priest of Taz, like this non-god. And Aslan says, well done, good and faithful servant, come into my heavenly country. And he's like, I didn't worship you, I was worshiping Taz. And Aslan's like, oh no, sweetie, you're worshiping me. So come on in.
Yeah.
That's inclusivism. The third position is universalism, which says God is everywhere. And as a result, since God was in you your whole life, God's got you, because God can't disown God's self. You think you have to decide where you are, and if we're fair, our lives aren't one or the other. We do this all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I believe in universal hidden human goodness, but not in Frank. And I do think, lest I sound like completely relativist, the criterion is who gets life and who pays for it. So if 99 people get life at the cost of one, I don't think God's in that. Unless that one chose to do it knowing what they were picking. Does that make sense?
To finish up, if I was an expert in 10 areas, but I didn't remember the 10th of the area that I was going to speak on, but I was an expert 9/10 in that area. I don't care if I could draw 100 people. If I couldn't get deep and down in that area, then I should rescind the offer to, I would not speak.
Yeah, I mean, so I think what I hear you saying is, right, like, you can be an astrophysicist. That doesn't mean you're an expert in metaphysical story, right? So stay in your lane. Most of us don't know enough about the things we're critical of. We forget, I am not an expert. Usually we see different and we say different is wrong. And that's not our lane. Like, most of us don't even know what we don't like. So I want to lift up a couple of practices for you if I can, and I'm going to name them, right? One of the things our Muslim sisters and brothers do is they say the big problem with humanity is we forget. We forget who we are, and more importantly, we forget whose we are. The problem is not that we're sinful or evil or wrong, it's that we forget. And so they say, look, to help us remember, let's have 5 things we do to help us remember. Let's pray 5 times every single day. And the prayer goes like this. There's one God, and we're gods. And God gave us this revelation in Muhammad, peace be upon him. They say, hey, sometimes we forget we're here not just for ourselves, for others. So we got to share. It's different. It's not 10% of what you make. It's 2.5% of what you're worth. And our Muslim brothers and sisters don't have clergy because they don't think anybody's more important than anybody else. They have lay leaders who take turns. They don't give money to their mosque. They give money to people who need money. And sometimes to them. They take a pilgrimage once in their year because they, in their life, because they say the story is so important, we want to physically connect with it and act it out. It's a way of remembering, right? And they fast for a lunar month that's called Ramadan, so that they can, in their body, celebrate restraint and the party that happens when we temporarily restrain our desire on behalf of larger life. So they feast at night and they don't eat during the day. If that's not life-giving, I can't help you at all. There's some lovely life in it, right? So those are some of our Muslim practices. There's 5, they're the 5 pillars.
Quickly, what was the part that they say we forget? What were the?
We forget who we are and whose we are. I think they're right. When I'm angry, I sure do forget who I am and whose are mine and whose are God's, right? And it would be really nice in a moment of anger if I could hop up and pray and remember. And this is actually what happens in Muslim households. The call to prayer comes out and you stop what you're doing, especially if it's an argument, and you pray together, and then the argument's probably over when you come back. You don't continue the argument, you stop. That's a lovely practice. I could use more of that. I've told you some of our Jewish brothers and sisters' practices already. They're amazing, right? The whole idea about Yom Kippur and like, hey, you got 8 days to fix this or you're going to live into it again. I mean, that's lovely. I don't give up chocolate for Yom Kippur. I give up, well, resentfulness. That's beautiful to me. The idea that rabbis disagree and they purposefully include dissenting opinion. And they don't say who's right or wrong. They say, here's one, here's the other. Where are you? I think that's beautiful.
Comparing fundamentalist Christian to non-fundamentalist Christian, from my point of view, and this is probably oversimplifying things, it kind of seems to me like the fundamentalists kind of start on all humans fall short of the glory of God. And the non-fundamentalists doesn't seem to me that really focuses on that. It kind of seems like there's more guilt associated with the fundamentalists than there is the non-fundamentalists. So it kind of sounds like from what I've heard from you in these classes is that we more think about the good in us, and while that still may fall short of the glory of God, it's something that we focus on and try to increase rather than focusing on our guilt.
Yeah, and I think if I could say this a different way, and maybe this is not what, this is what I'm hearing anyway, differently worded. I think because I grew up as a fundamentalist, my religious training was be obedient, do what God commands. And that's when I'm at my worst as a parent. I really actually don't want parenting to be predicated on obedience. I want it to be predicated on honor and life. When my head is really there. And sometimes I think honor and life are ambiguous. I don't know what that means. So I'll settle for something certain and hard. And that's obedience. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a turn I've noticed in myself. And when I'm a good parent, when I'm not a good parent, I don't want to label that. The parenting I offer that I celebrate the most is when I cultivate honor in my kids and to my kids instead of obedience. And I'd like to believe that's what God wants from us, is honor, which often shows up in things like gratitude and joy. Not instead of obedience, but pretty much instead of obedience. Yeah, I think so.
You were sitting behind me when we had, now a really conservative Jew is called an Orthodox Jew.
Yeah, and we didn't have one of those. So there's
So
like,
who was the older man?
yeah, that
White beard.
was a conservative rabbi, although he went to Reform seminary.
Okay.
He was the more conservative, which is a stretch between Orthodox and Reform. It's in this middle ground.
Okay. I don't call my first question, but my second question started the potential for me just blowing up in front of the 150 people that were there. And you would have to rescue me and throw me down in the second aisle or second row. My second question was, what do y'all think about Jesus?
And he said they don't think about Jesus at all.
Yeah. And then
He did that to be provocative, let's be clear. Yeah.
I restrained myself
Really
and
upset Joe.
in
Really
my
upset.
in my mental issues, some of y'all know, I can just blow up, raving maniac, and just jump over that guy in front of majority of people who don't even know me. I was totally restrained.
Thank you for that.
I was going to say to you, I feel comfortable. He was a man. You did recognize him. You did hear him. A lot of you believed him until you took him as a threat. And then you crucified him. And we remember that. And that is very center to the beginning of our church. And the previous time he had said, I don't believe it. And I could probably get a third question out. I actually got in there and I was scared, and I was also what's the thing? Lose your head. Dementia. I was also kind of feeling dementia.
Yeah.
Say, I want to contain myself to the point I'll let it out of my head and I'll go sit down.
Yeah.
And I felt very embarrassed because I said I had 3 questions. But I would have said, you continue to say, there's not Jesus. Why is that convenient? If you have a 4,000 or 5,000 year lifespan as a Jew, if you want to go back at any time, 33 years in this case, and say they didn't exist, that is mockery.
Maybe, and this is where I think it's really helpful. You know, I had this lovely conversation that I referenced a couple months ago with Kitty Carmine. We're just sitting there talking, and she just said, you know, Mike, when somebody says something you don't agree with, there's no point in correcting them.
Mm-hmm.
For the first time in my life, I thought, I think you're right. Because they're not going to hear you, right? You've disagreed with them. And to be honest, he didn't say that to disrespect you. Or if he did, so what? So what?
Well, his second answer did say that to me. And
He was cagey. And look, I think part of it is, and this is really helpful, and I feel like I do need to say this. The Gospels are really clear that Jesus was killed by Judeans, not by Jews. The word in the Gospels is he was killed by Judeans, people who lived in the territory of Judah. Some of them might have been Jewish. Some of them might have been Wiccan. Some of them might have been Missouri Synod Lutherans. I'm joking a little bit, but there's not a religious term in the Gospels. And it's sad that translators have rendered the word Judean as Jew because it's a geographic term, not a religious term. And I would tell you one of the roots of anti-Semitism in the church, which I think is an affront to God, anti-Semitism is evil and wrong, is saying the Jews killed Jesus when in fact the Judeans did. And I think that's really helpful for us. And one of the ways I think we practice not tolerance, I don't believe in tolerance. I don't. I believe tolerance is like you do you, I'll do me. No, I think we're called to practice respect, is we say our scriptures are comprised of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible, and there's no such thing as the Old Testament. I think that's anti-Semitic. God used to be this thing, and now we get the good stuff. That's pejorative. If you don't find God in the Hebrew Bible, read it again. That's what I would suggest. Or what veil have you put between your heart, to use words from the Hebrew Bible, and God's presence in the story? Some stories it's easier for me to see God in. Probably some different ones from Julia. That's a good thing. That's why we have 66 books in our library, because some will work better for me than others.
There was a reason those were all chosen to be in
I
this
choose to trust
compilation.
that.
But there's,
I choose to trust that there is something larger than reason at work in the Holy Library. And that even if I disagree, like I would tell you, I don't like the book of Ezra. I don't like it. It's important to keep it there instead of throwing it away, because otherwise I'd be creating God in my image. And Ezra offers this thing, like, be careful with your practice, like stay centered. When you're around folk, sometimes you can adopt stuff that like isn't in your value system. So how do you set a boundary? And I think that's an important conversation. We have that with our children.
Yeah.
Other kids use drugs. We don't use drugs in our house, right? I don't want my kid using drugs until they know what they're doing. And then at that point, right, if my kid uses drugs, am I going to cast them out for being disobedient, or can I think about the honor? But these are important questions to me.
Very short comment.
Yeah.
I don't want any feedback. One time I had a non-Christian talk to me. He said, "You're a Christian." This actually was a James Bond movie. And this crazy Muslim person was across the way. And James Bond was like ready to jump out of the airline. First thing he said to James Bond is, "You're a Christian." He said, "Yes." "So every week you drink the blood." That was what they thought.
And that's the way we mischaracterize other religions. We see them doing this thing, and we don't realize it's pointing at something deeper than it is. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it's on us, if we don't understand, to be curious instead of judgmental. And the question is, if you look at something that seems ugly to you, where's the life in that for you? I really want to know. And if you ask sincerely, I think people are honored to answer sincerely. In general, people don't get asked, they get judged. I don't understand why you do that, and I'd like to. Could you explain what that's done for you and your family and your community? I don't know why we're afraid to ask that question. I love when people ask me that question about my faith. And they do, because I wear one of these, right? So I think this is where we sit when we're doing this well.
And I think a lot of the times those questions kind of depends upon your tone of voice as far as whether you're honoring them or not. If you say, "Why you do that," that's fine. If you say,
"Why do you do that?" Look, we all get this. And this, I'll tell you, this is an interesting thing when we think about practice. And this will be my last story. When I was in Coronado, I was an associate, and I had taken the job from another associate who had kids, right? So she was on maternity leave and really couldn't come back to the job. And we were friends. She's a lovely person. She said, "Oh, Mike, as you start to become a priest, you're going to need to know what to do. So there's these 2 books you can buy. One's written by this guy called Galley, and one's written by this guy called Mishnah. And it tells you how to do all the sacraments, tells you how to put your hands, tells you the tone of voice, how many times do you sense the altar, this sort of thing. Like, it's called a priest's handbook, literally." So I put these books on my desk, and I'm like, oh yeah, like, I'm not from this tradition. I really need to know how to do it right. And my mentoring rector comes in and he sees the books and he's like, "Where the hell did you get those books?" And I said, "Oh, like my friend told me to get these." He was like, "Oh my God, throw those books away." Because look, man, kids can smell a mile away when you're being inauthentic. And kids know when you're lying. So if it isn't meaningful for you, don't do it. I think that's the Episcopal tradition on world religions. We don't have to comport ourselves in a thing for our piety to be real or holy or sacred. It gets to be our piety. And part of why we ask questions, why do we have this candle, is so we can decide, based on the history, is that life-giving for me? There are things we have in our sanctuary that people don't, it's not their thing. That's fine, because it probably is for somebody. I didn't know how the candle altar was going to work. Most Episcopal churches don't have them. Every week I look and there's like 15 of those things burning. That's life-giving for people, or they wouldn't come back to it, right? We come back to life. And I think that becomes how we evaluate this stuff. So the question is, if you can't see it, where's the life? I want to be curious enough till I can find it. And then I will tell you, like, I like to lift these things up when they're life-giving, because I want more life. I don't want less. I want meaningful reconciliation, Yom Kippur style. I want that. I don't want to give up chocolate because I don't see the point of that. Does that make sense? Okay, well, we'll have a session next week, parallel. We'll be Paladuro, and we'll also have some service. And we can maybe do both at the same time. Yes, I can talk about Paladuro while we paint candle holders or assemble bags. Yeah, so we'll work that out. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As always, email any questions that